Hello and welcome back. In this video we're going to be making a desk drawer for the new desk that I made, featuring some hand-cut dovetails and some of the leftover maple that I had from creating the desk itself. Here I'm just laying out my pieces. Everything's milled and ready to go to size here. They're labeled tails and pins, T and P. I start by scribing the thickness of the material here. I do that on all sides of all the boards. This is the depth that the dovetails go to. Now I'm laying out my dovetails with a little divider here. I plan on making a more in-depth video of this process, like a short, quick guide for those that are interested. But this video just shows the rough process. I'm scribing those dots that I made. This lays out the tails and pins. It's better if you use a marking knife. I just did pencil for this just because it's easier to see. Now I'm laying out the dovetails here. I'm doing 1 to 8 dovetails just because I like the look. And this just gives me a visual representation of what I'm cutting just because I don't do these often. I'm coming in and cutting the tails here. The goal is to go as close to that marking line as you can without going over. If you go through it, then you can see that cut on the finished board, which doesn't look good. Also here I'm using, you can see the Cat's Moses dovetail jig, which makes doing this a lot easier. It's a magnetic rest that attaches right to the saw, so you can get nice straight lines. It's good for beginners or people learning like me. Now I'm coming back through with a coping saw to trim out most of that waste that I've marked with the X's there. And same thing here, you get as close to that line as you can. Just come back through both directions and trim out all that waste on the interior portions. Now I flip it over and do the sides, which is just a straight cut. And once again, I'm using the Cat's Moses jig there to get this a nice straight cut. And same thing, right on that line, right on that scribe line that we marked in the beginning. Those are rough tails there, and I'm going to come in with a chisel here to chisel out that waste that I didn't cut out by not getting close to the line. Pretty much take small bites, working your way back towards that scribe line. And come through about halfway from each side. You don't want to go all the way through from one side because then you risk blowing out the material on the other side, if that makes sense. So doing about half or so on each side and then coming back in and cleaning up that middle is the way I traditionally do it. It's a pretty slow process working back towards that line, but this ensures you have a nice tight fit and you don't have any gaps. Now I'm taking the tail piece and transferring over to the pins, which will be the front of the box, which isn't traditional, but I like the look of the pins facing forward, especially for this small desk drawer that's not going to hold much weight. If you're concerned with strength, your tails should be on the sides and the pin should be on the front. But I just transfer those lines over, do a self-check there to make sure that everything makes sense, and then come back through again with that Cat's Moses jig, trimming down to that scribe line just as before, except these pieces are angled. And you want to cut on the inside of the waist portion. So where your X's are, you cut on the inside, and then you can always trim or pare back that edge later to get a better fit. Here I'm using the bow saw that I made in a recent video too. because I completed it mid-project here, and it worked great. A lot easier cutting, and the length of that blade gives you a little more flex to go through and really cut those pieces quickly. Now the same process here, I'll come through and chisel to remove that extra waste. So I'll skip through some of this. But it's a similar process, except you want to watch the angles of those pieces so you don't cut into them. So I usually start on the small side, knocking my material towards the larger side, and then come through and clean it up after. After a few test fits, you can come through and knock it in to place without glue, just to ensure you got a good fit. Everything looks good. So knocking this in with a mallet really slowly, really deliberately, listening for any cracking to make sure you don't break anything. Now without sanding or anything, that's a rough dovetail construction there. It'll get cleaned up a little bit after sanding and finishing. I repeat that process on all the sides to create this box and stage it into place so I can apply some glue, and then I'll knock it together. The joints are so tight that you don't need a ton of glue, especially with this particular set that I just did. And I knock it together there, and then get as much glue as I can off the surface so I don't have to worry about a difficult time finishing later. And now I'll let it sit. Now coming back through and showing some sanding here. I skipped through it, but this just gives a little, after you remove those pencil lines, you get a little better definition of that box. Now once again, I'm using polyacrylic here, just because it's the best finish that I use. I love it. It goes on quickly. You could put 2 or 3 coats on in a day and finish a project without waiting for days for polyurethane to cure. Now I'm going to route out the bottom so I can set the bottom of the drawer in there. I'm just using about an 1/8 inch or so cutting bit there. That allows me to get in so I have enough of an inset for that bottom panel to sit in. And since I finished it first, all the areas I'm cutting now are free of finish, so that glue will have a better time adhering than if you were gluing to a finished surface. Now I'm marking the corners here that I have to chisel out, as that round router bit cannot get into these corners well. So I just go and mark these corners, knock them out so that I have square sides, so that I can drop that bottom piece right in. At the table saw now, marking this rough outline, and as I do with most things, I sneak up on the cut, so I knowingly make this larger than it needs to be, and then slowly work in a 32nd of an inch or so at a time until I have a perfect fit. As this is a smaller box, I'm not too concerned with strength, but I am using epoxy here just to make sure I have a nice tight hold. And it's a little easier to hide if any of it does squeeze into the piece. It's not as noticeable as wood glue. Now I'm doing some non-traditional hinge install here. I'm using top mounted hinges just so I get a low profile attachment to my desk, as I don't have any sides to my desk. I decided to mount right to the bottom surface, and this seemed like the best way to do it, so I'm experimenting and trying it on this project. Now before installing it, as always, got to install my brand there, just because I'm pretty proud of this piece. It's not the best dovetails I've ever done, but they're pretty good. And then I screw that to the bottom of my desk off camera. We'll be able to see the finished product here. So here it is, mounted to the bottom of the desk. As you can see, that top mounted hinges make sense as there's no sides. And I'm very happy with how this turned out. Thanks again for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe, like, and comment, and let me know what you want to see next. Thank you.